Kama Sutra, Book 2, Chapter 4, The Art and Meaning of Bite Marks. When most people hear the words Kama Sutra, they often imagine that it is only a book about physical intimacy. However, the text is much broader than that. Written by Vatsyayana nearly 2,000 years ago, it explores human relationships, emotions, courtship, psychology, and the subtle ways affection was expressed in ancient India. One fascinating chapter discusses bite marks, not as acts of aggression, but as symbolic expressions of affection within an established romantic relationship. To understand this chapter properly, it is important to view it through its historical and cultural context, rather than through a modern lens. So, let's explore what Vatsyayana wrote and what these descriptions reveal about ancient ideas of love and romance. Why are bite marks mentioned? According to the Kama Sutra, physical signs of affection could serve as visible reminders of shared emotional moments. Just as people today may keep photographs, letters, or gifts from someone they love, ancient couples sometimes regarded temporary marks left during affectionate moments as symbols of closeness and emotional connection. The text suggests that these marks represented trust, familiarity, and mutual passion between partners who already shared a loving relationship. They were never described as something to be imposed on an unwilling person. Instead, the emphasis throughout the chapter is on mutual affection, shared enjoyment, and emotional harmony. In this sense, the marks functioned as emotional memories, rather than simply physical signs. Different types of bite marks. Vatsyayana describes several traditional patterns of bite marks, giving each a poetic name based on its appearance. Rather than using medical or technical language, he compares them to flowers, ornaments, or natural shapes. Some patterns were intended to be small and delicate, while others were larger or more decorative. The names themselves reflected the literary style of ancient Sanskrit writing, where beauty and symbolism were valued just as much as practical description. These classifications show how carefully ancient authors observed even subtle expressions of affection, turning them into an art form with recognizable styles and names. The purpose of listing these varieties was not to establish rigid rules, but simply to describe customs that were already familiar in society. Where were they traditionally mentioned? The Kama Sutra mentions that such affectionate marks were traditionally associated with parts of the body that were considered suitable within a romantic context. The text treats these locations symbolically rather than medically. Different areas were believed to carry different emotional significance, and their selection depended on the comfort and preference of both individuals. Importantly, these descriptions appear only in the context of private relationships between consenting partners. They were not intended for public display or as universal customs that everyone was expected to follow. Instead, Vatsyayana presents them as examples of practices that some couples enjoyed, according to their own preferences. When were they considered appropriate? Timing plays an important role throughout the Kama Sutra. Vatsyayana repeatedly explains that expressions of affection should match the emotional state of both partners. This chapter suggests that such gestures were appropriate only when there was mutual attraction, trust, and emotional readiness. They might occur during moments of celebration, before a temporary separation, after a joyful reunion, or during periods of deep affection. The underlying principle is consistency with the mood of the relationship. Affection should never feel forced or unexpected. Instead, it should naturally reflect the emotional closeness shared by both people. This idea demonstrates that the Kama Sutra places emotional awareness above mechanical actions. Different personalities and preferences. One of the most interesting observations made by Vatsyayana is that not everyone enjoys expressing affection in exactly the same way. Some people naturally prefer gentle and subtle displays of love. Others appreciated more expressive or passionate gestures. The text recognizes these differences without declaring one style superior to another. Instead, it encourages partners to understand each other's temperament and respond with sensitivity. In modern terms, we might say that every relationship develops its own unique love language. This recognition of individual personality is remarkably thoughtful for such an ancient work. Regional differences across ancient India. Vatsyayana also notes that customs varied from one region of India to another. Certain areas were known for favoring more restrained expressions of affection, while others were described as appreciating more expressive romantic traditions. These observations remind us that even in ancient India, there was no single universal way of expressing love. Cultural traditions, local customs, and social expectations influenced how romance was understood in different communities. Rather than insisting that one regional style was correct, the Kama Sutra simply records these differences as observations about society. This makes the text valuable not only as a guide to relationships, but also as a historical record of cultural diversity. Mutual affection above everything else. Perhaps the most important lesson in this chapter is the emphasis on mutual willingness. Throughout the Kama Sutra, Vatsyayana repeatedly stresses that affection should arise naturally from shared desire and emotional harmony. Neither partner should feel pressured or uncomfortable. Respect, communication, and understanding are presented as essential foundations of a successful relationship. Without these qualities, even the most beautifully described gestures lose their meaning. This principle remains relevant. Even today, healthy relationships are built not on imitation of ancient customs, but on mutual respect, trust, and genuine care for one another. Love tokens and lasting memories. The chapter also describes certain affectionate marks as temporary reminders of love. Just as someone today may treasure a handwritten letter, a meaningful photograph, or a cherished gift, some ancient couples viewed these brief signs as emotional keepsakes. They symbolized a shared moment that would soon disappear but remain alive in memory. This poetic idea reflects one of the broader themes of the Kama Sutra. Love is not measured only by grand gestures, but also by the small moments that strengthen emotional bonds. The marks themselves were temporary, but the memories they represented could last much longer. Conclusion. When viewed in its proper historical context, this chapter is less about physical techniques and more about understanding how ancient Indian society expressed affection, intimacy, and emotional connection. Through symbolic gestures, poetic descriptions, observations about personality, and discussions of regional customs, Vatsyayana reveals a sophisticated understanding of human relationships. More importantly, the recurring message throughout the chapter is that genuine affection depends on mutual respect, emotional awareness, and shared willingness. These timeless principles continue to resonate even after nearly 2,000 years. The Kama Sutra is therefore not simply a manual of physical intimacy, but a fascinating exploration of human psychology, cultural traditions, and the many ways love has been expressed throughout history.